Welcome to Liner Notes. My name is David Bixler. Créole Renaissance is the latest offering from pianist Aruán Ortiz on Intakt Records. This solo piano record draws its inspiration from the negritude movement that originated in Paris in the early part of the 20th century that was established to counteract the anti-colonialism attitudes that many black artists in Paris faced as they worked in their various disciplines. In this episode of Liner Notes, Aruán describes the inspiration that he was able to draw from this movement and reflects on the parallels he encounters as a Cuban-American living in New York City in 2025. Good to see you, man. Welcome to Liner Notes. Appreciate you making the time to speak with us today.
Likewise, man. Thank you so much for the invitation. I appreciate it.
And we are here to talk about, celebrate your new recording, Créole Renaissance, on Intakt Records that recently just came out August 29th of this year. And it is a solo piano record. It's inspired by the negritude movement in France from the 1930s. So, I have some questions, I have some thoughts, but first I thought it'd be interesting to let you speak about maybe your discovery of what was happening in Paris in the 30s with what I assume are Africans that were living there, artists of different disciplines, and seeing a need to express themselves and form a bond and a voice, and maybe how pushing a century later, how that relates to you, a Cuban now living in Brooklyn.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you for the question. This was fantastic. Um, well, I've been fascinated by that period for many reasons. Not only for the connection between Cuban composers that they study in France around that period with the iconic pedagogue Nadia Boulanger, and one of them was Alejandro Garcia Caturla, and also the connection of another composer that they wasn't linked to Nadia, but he was born in Paris, and it was really connected in that period with that movement is Amadeo Roldan. There were a lot of intertwined creative dialogue and influences between the Cuban intellectuals and composers. Also was a painter with Fredo Lam that he was really connected to the Cubism, with Picasso, Braque, etc. Was also around the period, right? And I was studying that movement, and then I did another solo record in 2017. Was inspired by the Cubism, but especially the Afro Cubism, because I am been fascinated and study and researching the connection between the all African Afro diasporic Caribbean intellectualism with also modernism in France specifically, um, but also in Europe, and then through a work that I start to put it together, wrote the music for a presentation that I did in November. I spent like a year or something investigating about the IMSSF and the magnitude movement, the Créole, uh, about Frantz Fanon, like René Menil, the surrealism, Sartre, the existentialism. And I start to kind of researching and I found the connection between the Harlem Renaissance, between the what was happening in the young students that they were from the colonized island of the Caribbean, but the French Caribbean islands, and then actually studying in France, and how was their view from how they were perceived in the France as one of the main colonizers, let's put it that way, empire. And then I got to know about Leopold Sédar Senghor, the Senegalese writer and politician, but also a lot of intellectuals and musicians that were coming and they were migrating to Paris after the First World War. And what was happening was these kids, what they was influenced by, because was the Harlem Renaissance movement was very essential as a reference for those African descent students from the French colonies or from the African colonies as well, as a point to get inspired by the sophistication, the knowledge, and the music, the movement. Josephine Baker was one of the ambassador of that kind of American culture in Paris. But and Richard Wright's also another one. The writer Richard Wright's, uh, and and then how they adopt, because they tried several journals how to denounce how they were seen, perceived, and treated as, you know, people who come from the colonies. They didn't have the same rights as French. And they were really talking as a young um, college students in Paris, especially Césaire and Senghor, Nardal sisters, Léon Rondre de Mans. They were kind of really finding a channel that they could express themselves, and avoiding the filters of like they could be prohibited, because in France they have a ministry, but then called Ministry of Colonies, that they have to check what they were talking about, the part they call the French culture or the French government, and the relationship with the colonies. So they found the connect, not only that uh, in surrealism, in the abstractionism, in existentialism, in philosophy, and all the revolutionary and avant-garde ways of expressing themselves, a way to avoid the filters of the ministerial colonies in order to express themselves. At the same time, they were studying deeply students of the French culture, but and they dedicate themselves to really get knowledge on the European culture in order to express their own reality and expression as a Caribbean student and their own Caribbean traditions. And that was something that fascinated to me, how you are able to adopt, accept, absorb, and study different art forms, but in order to express your own identity. And that's what I was the main concept for this album.
Okay. That brings up a couple questions for me. With the parallel, because the Harlem Renaissance was happening basically at the same time, and with that cross-pollination, was there like a formal exchange of ideas, or was it just Americans coming over and hanging out, and, the French artists and intellectuals of that time, kinda gleaning what they could from what they're told is happening in the States at the same time, and, basically the same kind of struggle for recognition and identity.
Yeah, well, yeah, I think they were hanging out, that's for sure. And but the purpose, the meaning wasn't the same. Maybe Lanton Hughes a little bit, what was happening in the reality of the black population, the black community in America. So how they were seeing that clash was different because the American, let's say that the African American, they back then they didn't see themselves, especially the Harlem Renaissance, that was like a middle class, middle upper class movement. They didn't see themselves as a colonized. They feel themselves American, different than being in Ireland, being the Martinique, or being in in Senegal or in African colonies, that they see themselves, they would treat themselves, they was perceive themselves as a colonized. So they have to claim and advocate toward the anti-colonialism. So it was a different point of view on approach, let's put it that way.
Okay. I mean, did someone like Hughes or, Hurston, were they in support? Did they come and, offer aid to their, compatriots that were, striving for the same things in Paris at that time?
Well, not quite. Also, to be honest with you, the language barrier, because some of those people they didn't speak English,
Right, right.
and especially Cesar, they didn't speak English. So André Breton was the translator of his work into English, and also Richard Wright, and he collaborated with them in Paris. But the struggle was different, I think. I think the African American struggle back, in that period in the States was different than being a person from a colonies studying and living and learning in the colonized sir, you know, uh, context, so they have a different approach, although they have certain things in common. However, the whole Harlem Renaissance infused a reference for, knowledge and sophistication, how the music was, um, how to produce sort like a very high level music based on the infusing, talking about the music, but also in the literature, talking about the message that they were talking about, Hughes and Wrights back then. Anna McKay was a Jamaican writer. How the reality of the African American, or the reality of the African descent community. What is the reality? What was made you be yourself through? How can you go through it and make and express yourself through, any art form? Could be literary, could be poetry, could be painting. There's so many artists that were actually portraying the reality of the African descent population in that period in different areas or different countries. But that was the connections in my regard. But of course, the way that you perceive yourself was different one to another.
Mhm. You already spoke of there was an office, a person that was monitoring what these people were doing in France, and am kinda morphing into the music. 3 of your pieces are based on journals or writings that were associated with this movement, and, as just kinda glancing over the dates, it seemed that all 3 of them were short-lived, that the first one started and then, kinda died out and another one rose in its place. Were they facing a lot of obstacles, whether it be financial or, social or political to keep this thing going and doing what they were doing?
In my research, I realized that yeah, they did, and of course they were young. As they were students. They had a lot of like uh, uh,
Energy.
energy, exactly,
Yeah.
and but they were very confrontational with the Minister of Colonies. So as I was saying before, that minister, they were kind of checking and evaluating what kind of work, especially in universities, etc., they were producing, what they were talking about, and then because the view of the friends back then, they thought that they were doing the best. They were, of course, educating those people from the colonies. That's why the system thought back then. So they were very confrontational. That's why those magazines, they were those journals like Legitime Defense and to the Anwar, they were banned and canceled. And actually,
Oh.
they having some problems because their scholarship was they they were reduced or cut it. So they had to embrace surrealism. They had to embrace existentialism, because they were there that was happening there, and then they found that that way, especially through their surrealist manifesto, they could avoid, the censorship of the Minister of Colonies, and they were very successful at it.
All right, I want to move on to the music. Great music, man. Great playing, and the sound is really it's pretty spectacular. You're using a lot of extremes. Like, the first thing that you hear on the first track, is like the bottom of the piano, and just it resonated. It's beautiful. The thing I'm kind of chuckling about on your website, you're described as a wayward stylist, which I thought was fantastic. And so I mean, how did these these ideas, how do they present themselves in your music? And also my two-prong question, how much of this music, like if we heard a concert and you were to play The Great Camouflage, how much would that resemble what is on the recording? How much is improvised? How much is actually composed?
Oh no, mainly that's type composed.
Okay.
They're improvisation, of course. All the pieces are based on specific notated framework. And especially the great camouflage. There's no improvisation. It's not improvised. It's all notated.
Wow, okay. Alright.
That's one of the pieces that I didn't know improv. And then I was deal, of course, I was dealing with the motion of the piece was mainly about dynamics. So the melody of that piece is based on the dynamic, the dynamic gesture. It's not it's not lines, so it's the recurrent dynamic that's happened. Also, I played the piece 2 or 3 times, I think 3 times. So every time you could get more familiar with the piece because the dynamic are the same, because that is the melody, where the forte, fortissimo is here, or you have the pianissimo here, in which part of the beat kind of hitting, and then the note also that I have to be not related with the this core texture that I was presenting in the piece. So everything is through compose. I didn't improvise at all on that piece. You know. So also on number one on the L'Étudiant Noir, is about the pulse. Ping, 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 ping. Everything is about pulse. That accelerate and decelerate. You know, it's a pulse, accelerate, decelerate, and all. And but the main idea is having two parallel world. Where you could live in the reality, but at the same time, another reality is happening. And because we don't see it or don't experience it, doesn't mean that it's not there. So that's you call that two distant poles, and then it's kind of closing the gaps. That was the concept of that piece, and how you close the gaps. And it's based on also on I don't know if you're familiar with George Bataille. George
I
Bataille,
am not.
yeah, it's one of those surrealists. Was a dissident, you know, and he created a journal called Formless. So what he did on that journal was exposing, the gritty of the elite, French elite, and in the same level, in the same magazine, a tribal tradition in the Pacific Islands, So like very shocking. So it's kind of portraying both realities that is happening at the same time, but they are technically they have no relation one to another, but yes, they do have it, because we are living in the same space-time continuum. The only thing that did separate is the geography, and it was kind of dealing with that, but at the same time, how they could close gaps between, your ideas and how to implement it. So that's why I call it Le Estudiant. So, but it's also composed. But I have we'll have improvisation, of course, but it's composed. Yeah, it's the same. Like for instance, Legitime Defense. That people think like, oh no, that is just playing and free. No, that's not free at all. It's like a very specific rhythm. Kan taka tan kan taka tan ta, ta taka tan ka taka tan ka ka ka, ta taka tan ka taka tan ka ku ku. But that rhythm is underneath, and that rhythm is it come from the French, the Afro-French tradition or the Franco-Caribbean rhythmic tradition. I borrowed from Cuban Haitian tradition. But what I did was I decontextualized. I kind of decomposed it a little bit within extending and contracting. So, and then I added some pitch collections, closed pitch collection that sounds more like a clusters. But those clusters, they have a specific organization going up and coming down. And then they have also contrast, which is kind of creating some space to expand and to breathe what I was doing, So I was accelerating again but everything was based on that rhythm, the pattern, the rhythm itself.
All right. Interesting. When you speak of the clusters, one of the things that struck me is that I thought there's a lot of kind of maybe Messiaen influence to some of the stuff that you were doing. Would that be accurate in your musical world? Or do
Yeah, yeah. I like French. I like the French composers, especially 20th century. We could go from Messiaen, even before, you could go from Furet, and you could go to Gerard Brisset, the spectralist. And because they, as a Cuban descent, in the Cuban avant-garde for the 20th century, they were so connected to the French school. Even in the 19th century, always there were close connection between the Cubans music scene and the French school, as I said, Fourier, a lot of people love Fourier, Ravel, also Varese, Edgar Varese. Edgar Varese was a very close friend of Amadeo Rodin. They have the same composer guild in New York in the 1920s. Stravinsky, that he spent time in Paris, and he was in Cuba, and he was in the United States. So, but Lamb was one of those major writers, I'm sorry, painters that he, when the Cubism happened, he was there. He was one of the first artist that was embraced Cubism, but the theme of his painting was really his own identity. He was Chinese, African, white. He has like a great mix himself. And then he was his themes was based on his own reality as a Afro-Cuban Chinese, like it's
Wow.
fantastic.
Wow.
Landis is
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
fascinating. Yeah, he has a, and Alejo Carpentier, and one of the musicologists that and ethnomusicologists that I admire a lot was Argelirus Leon, Cuban Argelirus Leon, and he studied with Nadia Boulanger, which is one of those major pedagogues that I uh, I admire. Not only her technique as a teaching, but also her ideas that she infused in so many artists from the from Caribbean and Americas. You could talk from Aaron Copland to Quincy Jones to Villalobos, to Elliot Carter to uh, um just Philip Glass. So this was incredible, and all of them grabbed something from her, and that became their uniqueness. You know, so the French school, I've been also I embrace somehow in my pieces, my writing pieces, this integral serialism, by Boulez. So it's another composer that I like a lot. So I try to mix so many, not mix, I try to express myself where I am, everything that I like, everything that I've been studying. You could find Monk, Andrew Hill, Boulez, and, uh, you know, Compay Segundo and Los Van Van, and then Duke Ellington and Herbie Hancock.
Yeah. There's a lot of music out there, man. Yeah. No. Phenomenal.
Yeah, it's
Um,
just one line for me.
yeah. On the record for the listener, there's a couple things that are unique, stand out. One is from the distance of my freedom, where you are speaking. Are those your words?
Yes, correct. That's my
Okay.
word.
All right. So you wrote this. I don't know if you would call it a poem or your reflection. And,
Yeah, it's a poem. It's a
okay.
poem. It's poem inspired by Césaire.
Primitivism versus modernism. Surrealism silent exclusion is black intellectualism, universalism.
I use a lot of repetition. The isms, the repetition is called something I call an anaphoric rhythm of words. Anaphora. Anaphora is the way that you repeat certain words as a technique. A lot of surrealists use it. So those isms, for me, I decontextualize it and put it as a rhythmic tool, as a rhythmic device for to compose the poem. So it was like the composition actually was the poem. That was the structure, and then the music was around the poem. So
So,
I tried to see the poem as the main thing. You know,
so is the rhythm of the poem what is the constant, and the music floats in and around the words?
correct.
Okay. So that might change if I heard you do this live.
Oh, definitely.
Yeah. Okay. Well, good. That's how it's supposed to be, man. Right. All right. And then the other one you use prepared piano on "We Belong to Those Who Say No to Darkness." So maybe just talk about your ideas behind that. You've done this before, I presume, and
Oh, yes.
what are you looking for in doing this? I mean, it's really cool to listen to, like when you're in a quiet place and you can hear everything that's going on.
Beautiful, beautiful. Yeah, I like the resonance a lot. As I said, I've been really digging the spectral music, if we say Murray. I mean, each of them. There's a friend of mine that she's a great composer. That she's talking about spectral modulation also. So it's how, and for me, everybody could have their own way to say it and to work on it. For me, my was about the resonance, how to expand the 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 resonance of the sound itself. My medium is the piano, but I was more intended to compose around the sound, the sonic landscape, because that was based on that phrase that struck me when I read it. We belong to those to say no to darkness. That I said in the first issue of the magazine called Journal Tropiques that was founded by Cesar, and after long story, from that journal, but that phrase means a lot to different people. Everybody have their own interpretation. I try to sonic translate, what the phrase means for me. So, and then I was dealing with a very low end of the piano, but I deal with partials inside the piano. I had like some tapes, inside the strings, you know, to
Yeah.
deal with some partials that I create something constant. At the same time, I was getting into that metal timbre, that I could vibrate. I was trying to get as far as possible from the piano within, without losing the essence of the instrument itself. So, and then I was kind of putting some melody here and there, but I have also like some papers to kind of mute somehow the resonance itself. So I have to, for one part, I split the piano in four parts, to be honest. So each part have a different timbre, different kind of mode. I was able to deal with and that was everything was played at once, but I was kind of trying to orchestrate those sonic possibilities more, to orchestrate it. How could I orchestrate those sonic possibilities? What those sounds was providing to me, and how I could work on it, how I could make variation out of it, how I could create counter melodies out of those, without losing, the identity, or without losing the characteristic of each of those sounds. Because that's why the piece is short, because if not, it's probably getting crazy, but it was very fascinating because at the same time, I let a little space for the piano sound that I sometimes was blending with the metallic, the metal timbre, and was very nice. It was very nice. Also, the intervals I was using, was close and little open, but close and little open, but it's all based on minor third, minor second, like a half step and minor thirds, creating a kind of harmonic minor ish, that also could have a reminiscence. After I played it, I realized that, oh, this might come from some, you know, uh, um, that realm of Macam on scale or harmonic minor type of thing. It's just good to work on it. Because I think about in interbolic, I don't think tonal. I think interbolic. I like to think interbolic because that take me out of the tonal context, which I feel better thinking that way. I'm not attached to any specific tone. I like to combine intervals. So
I look forward to listening to the piece again with this knowledge. And, I think that'll transform a little bit about what I'm hearing. Last thing I want to ask you about the music, the haberdasher. Metaphor for someone or something? What,
oh no, the haberdasher is was a person.
oh,
You know,
I know it's like it describes like a trade, but was it for a specific person or like what's the
Yes, yes,
oh,
absolutely. Yeah, thanks to the haberdasher was that André Breton met Césaire and Menil and knew about this the magazine Tropiques, and they
ah,
had like a very close collaboration. The haberdasher was René Menil's sister, because the story is that coming from from Paris the way to the United States, New York, they were in the ship with Andre Breton was there, was the other intellectuals. One of them was the Cuban painter Wilfredo Lamb, and they stopped in Martinique, and uh, and uh, and then he was trying to find some souvenir for his daughter, and then he went to that store, and then the haberdasher was selling like selling some of the souvenirs, and then Breton by accidentally or maybe not, he saw that kind of very austere small journal, and he started reading, and then he was fascinated with what he read, and then who was the writer, and then the first thing that he did was asking her who wrote that, because never seen that kind of such a beautiful, profound way of writing, and very unique. And then she said, "Oh, that's the friend of my brother." And they said, "So who's your brother?" And they said, "I want to meet him." So she talked to René Menil, and then at that the next day they Breton meet with Césaire, and that was the beginning of the amazing, great, 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 like a collaboration. So that's why the Haberdasher. That was the title of the album, of the song, the Haberdasher.
Okay.
Yeah.
Caught my eye. Before I let you go, what's next? Where can we hear you? Are you presenting this music in concert anytime soon?
Well, not quite, but I'm presenting on the 23rd at Roulette Intermediate in Brooklyn. It's two programs. The first program is I want to play some music with Nicole Mitchell and Don Byron of the James Newton, the composer and fluteist,
Yeah, sure.
Anthony Davis, the pianist. They have a trio called Trio Square that they released like magnificent albums in the early '80s, and they were going to play some of that music, and then I want to incorporate a couple of songs from that solo record. And in the second half of that program will be the first work in progress of a project, an opera project that I'm working on, and so I I'm presenting what the opera will be about, the concept, and the opera is about the only queen of Haiti, Mary Louise David, or Mary Louise Christophe, was the the wife of General Henry Christophe or King Henry Christophe. So was the one and only queen, the one and only kingdom in Haiti. Not many people know about that, but Haiti was a kingdom after the Haitian Revolution between 1811 to 1820. They have the north part of Haiti. They have a kingdom, and what the ruler was Henry Christophe, and Mary Louise Christophe was the wife. And the story about her, about that period between when the kingdom fell apart and she went to exile. So in that moment, and the struggle that she had with the daughters going to exile, or that kind of thing. So, but it's still a project. It's going. So it's not done. I'm presenting the first work in progress of that project.
Oh, that sounds great, man. I'm gonna try to check that out for sure. Aruán, I thank you for your time. Good to see you. And again, the record is Créole Renaissance, and check it out. Great stuff. Be well, man. Liner Notes is grateful for the support of Van Doren Reeds and Mouthpieces. Be sure and check out the Van Doren Advisory Studio in New York City for all your sound sculpting needs. Liner Notes is grateful for the support of Arlen's Good Beer in Bowling Green, Ohio.
Engineered by Marco Mendoza. Visit his website at engineeredbymarco.com. The theme music is Hide, Seek, Find from my record Beatitude, out on Tiger Turn.
Produced by David Bixler. Be sure and subscribe to Liner Notes wherever you find your podcasts. If you like what you hear, I ask that you consider supporting Liner Notes financially. You can do this by going to the Liner Notes tab at davidbixler.com. Thank you for your consideration.